back here to jump into it and get into what we're really talking about with the NBA and the culture. But first, let me just break down a couple of just basic things that I think drives everything that I'm going to be covering on my show, even when we get into all of the ways that fans can engage and make money and how the leagues and the team are doing the same.
Will Iguodala foul Lillard? Almost stolen. Lillard stolen.
I just want to break down the economics of what we call how the NBA really drives revenue for itself, for its team, and for the players. And that's driven by this notion or this agreement called the CBA. Many of you have probably heard it. Every league has it. Many corporations even have a structure like this between its employment workforce and the company or the enterprise. NBA does the same thing. And inside of that CBA or collective bargaining agreement is this little notion, this little component or this mechanism called BRI, or basketball-related income. This is like the golden nugget for how money moves around the league. But first, let me just break down a couple of things and like how this really matters at scale. NBA is one of the fastest growing leagues in professional sports, hands down. One of the fastest. Pre-pandemic, they were making about $8.7 billion. During the pandemic and thereafter, we've seen a decline of approximately 10%. You might think that's relatively small, but it is in the grand scheme of things when you talk about how that money gets distributed to the players and the teams, and ultimately how it impacts what's happening in local markets. Whatever location that you might be, where you're repping one of your favorite teams, this impacts them. And it's all about the complexity of the agreement that exists between the owners and the players, and the owners of the teams and the players through how they're managed through what's called the NBPA, National Basketball Players Association. And so the BRI, basketball-related income, is really a listing of all of the items that determines who can and cannot make money, how that money is dispersed amongst teams. Think of it as an accounting calculation, which really identifies what those elements are and who can take advantage of them, when and where. And it totals all the income. BRI totals all the income from all of the teams collectively, and then determines where that money goes. And that really includes revenue generated from events or games and all the ancillary events that you might know of that happens in the community. It also includes all goods, merchandise, clothing, apparel, even revenue that you see from their partners and things of that nature, and the services. Now, we divide that up at the end of the year, and that's what determines and drives a lot of the decisions that are made across the league. As the revenue increases, the salaries increase. You know, it's very common. I think we've all heard it when you think about sports. From the outside looking in, we comment quite a bit as fans, as media, as just casual observers. You think about why does a certain player, why do these players make so much money? Well, in the grand scheme of things, you have to think about the bigger picture around how much money or how much is in that pot at any given time. And that's what BRI is really all about. And so what's really driving this, some big components here, we think about salary cap, which is the amount a team can spend on a given player. Players in the league, it's a 50-50 split. Now, based on what they project the income to be at the end of the year, based on whatever they project, if they say, hey, we expect it to be $100, are they going to hit that number or not, will determine how much that 50-50 split moves. But it can only vary no greater than plus or minus 1%, meaning there will always be a range between either side making 49 to 51%. In kind of our current state, players make, the Players Association lands around 49%. The league owners in the league are around 51%. Now, a big part of this is based on national and international contracts. And those contracts mean the partners that we all know, these big brands, these outlets, the TV outlets, etc., make up a big portion of that. Merchandising makes up a big portion of that. All of the things that makes up those teams or that makes up that list, you'd be surprised. And that will amaze you and shed some light on why certain decisions are made. Let's say, for example, when we're in a pandemic last year, and still are. Why are certain decisions being made? And this is kind of one of the indicators around why the teams, the league, or the players are leaning a certain way in terms of playing games, being out in what you may call or may think of is at risk during a coronavirus outbreak. Now, there are some things where the organizations or the teams make money that do not go into this pot. Examples of that are the sale of real estate. For example, the deal that Ballmer is working on, who is the owner of the Los Angeles Clippers, for a new location for the Clippers to play. And the fact be known, the Forum where the Lakers used to play was previously owned, and that land was owned by James Dolan, owner of the New York Knicks. And there's a deal that's happening there. Any revenue or income or proceeds from that particular deal do not go into BRI. Revenue sharing is another component, as well as assignments from proceeds of assignments from players' contracts. So all of the things that go into signing a player, there is some money that's generated there, not in that pot. But why is it important? Because there's a direct impact upon what a player can make, and what a player can make impacts decisions in terms of where they play, in terms of who they represent, in terms of their sponsors, so forth and so on, and what drives their focus or their commitment to various markets. And you'll see players lean in a lot more when they have their financial interests are being met, and vice versa for the team. But more money, more business. I think that's a common thing that we all know and that we get. So next, let's think about the contributors of this. And I want to dig into just a little bit, just something off the top of my head when I was just thinking about who are the major contributors of BRI and what's the large chunk of money coming from. TV contracts and money. Let me give you an example here. Nike in 2015 signed one of the largest brand deals with the league thus far, 8-year, $1 billion. And they became the official supplier of all uniforms and clothing, and they could also represent and take advantage of real estate on the jersey, if they so choose, in other locations where that best suits them, to be able to represent their brand and their business. That was critical. That was huge. Similarly, on the TV contract side, on the TV rights side, you see the deal that ESPN and TNT did back in 2016, 2017, which makes up a quarter of the NBA's revenue. It's 25%. That's a 9-year, $24 billion deal. So the next collective bargaining agreement and the next time those contracts are up, you better believe these are issued items that are going to be on the table, which drives potential income that players can make. And this is what's really driving a lot of those decisions. Now, on the other side of the fence, the fan base itself is also contributing to that in terms of revenue received through international contracts. And one of the biggest markets for the NBA, let's say pre-2019 or pre-2020, would be the deal they had in place with China, and driving and engaging a lot of their fan base, which is 500 million fans projected that are participating in the NBA and in the NBA money train as well. Now, I mention that because we saw in October of 2019 a lot of that changed. Even before the pandemic, there was a tweet that Daryl Morey, at the time GM of the Rockets, who made statements in support of his position, agree with it or not, his position around the protests in Hong Kong. And that created a stir to the point where the relationship between the NBA and China was severely damaged, which caused them to pull a lot of their investment and their engagement with the NBA out of the fold. Fast forward 3 months after that, 3-4 months, we're heading into a pandemic that nobody saw coming. So match the pandemic on top of loss of revenue and income and engagement and expansion into the Chinese market, the NBA was in a tough position. But let me explain. Like, we all have heard of Coca-Cola and McDonald's and Nike and Adidas, and the list goes on and on and on. We know all of these popular brands. But coming out of the Chinese market, there's companies like Tencent, who did a $1.5 billion deal, which is a multinational tech conglomerate, a holding company that has the rights to air NBA games and content. They are a big distribution channel for the NBA. That's at risk. 2018 to 2019, we saw nearly 500 million viewers. In fact, if you go and compare pre-pandemic, there were upwards coming out of the Chinese market, upwards of 21, 22 million viewers watching just Game 6 alone. Game 6 alone in NBA Finals, we saw coming out of that market, which is nearly 19 million more than the US as a whole. Another company, Weibo, which is a social media company, they have millions and millions of fans that engage in their content in that market that are upwards of 50 million followers on the app. That is another channel for the NBA to engage that's been at risk. So this is an entirely new channel that the NBA was able to unlock that is more than doubles what the NBA had been doing thus far. And this all started late 90s, or let's say early 90s, when David Stern was at the helm, who made a commitment to start engaging internationally in the Chinese market. So that was a big deal. Something that I think a lot of people have overlooked. The next thing is then thinking about the European market. And now we're talking about a more established market as well that has broadcasting channels that reaches millions and millions of subscribers. And they have a big partnership with the NBA through being sports broadcasting. Sky Italia is another that did a 4-year extension with the NBA to air 300 regular season games as well. So you're seeing all of these international angles that are impacting how the NBA makes money through BRI. That's coming back to here's how players can get paid, here's how the teams can increase their revenue base and do things like build new housing or contribute to housing and development in various communities that can contribute to retail and development of communities that have been either desolate or transforming and gentrifying communities. And that's not by happenstance. We saw in the Bay Area the same type of effect happens once the Warriors start headed to the finals, and what it did for that market and how you saw ticket prices and merchandising and events skyrocket just off the fact that you had an NBA team in a market that was driving global attention, driving investors into those markets, and it drives people to actually move to those markets. And that's how you get these hot pots of New York, LA, the Bay Area, Chicago, so forth and so on. And as you see other markets that aren't as large start to have more competitive teams and have more high-profile players, those are the types of things that you're going to start to see over time. So those are a bunch of the things that I think you will start to notice as you think about where does this money come from, how does it get distributed, because the players and the teams are relying very heavily on the increase of that revenue or maintaining that revenue so that it can be distributed evenly. Remember this, that 49, 51%, not necessarily just the specific number that exists there.